Welcome to Once Driven, Forever Smitten. This is a different style of video. I've been wanting to do something for a while, looking back at General Motors and their sale of Vauxhall and Opel to Stellantis. And as I thought about it, it kind of grew arms and legs because there's a lot of stuff going on with Stellantis in America at the moment with Dodge, and there's also stuff going on here for the car industry as a whole and us as consumers in the UK with this zero emission vehicles mandate, which I'm sure you're aware of if you watch car channels on YouTube. There's a few people talking about it. What it means is from 2035, that's the existing ban, there's to be no more sales of petrol or diesel powered vehicles, well, cars in the UK, and this includes hybrids. Now, it's said that our wonderful Labour government is going to bring this back to 2030, which was the original deadline, which got extended. And at the moment, there's a sliding scale in place whereby at the moment it's going to be 20% of all cars sold are zero emissions. So again, no hybrids allowed. And this is going to increase gradually over the years up to 100%. And the government's idea is they're going to fine car manufacturers potentially. Yeah, and what this means is they are potentially going to fine manufacturers £15,000 per vehicle for every one that they sell over the quota that they've got, so they can only sell electrics. And you're seeing manufacturers start to move rapidly in that direction. Stellantis wants to be all EV by 2028. Is it going to work? Probably not, I would say. It looks like EV sales are flatlining, and there's issues with the enormous depreciation of the existing models and also charging infrastructure. So many people aren't going to be able to charge these things at their house. The charging that you get out on the road is expensive and it's not reliable. There's not enough of it. I mean, we know all this stuff anyway. I don't see why they're hammering hybrids so hard as well, because in theory, if you've got to have a battery in a car, these can be an excellent solution. They can produce really good fuel economy figures, and you potentially don't have to charge them. You were not going to get stranded somewhere. So there's all that to consider going forward. What we're seeing is the end of performance vehicles. Now, frustratingly, Stellantis has never offered any model of performance Vauxhall since they took over. And they do certain models of Peugeot, which is explained they're kind of on the way out as well. But at the moment, you can still buy a petrol powered. You can get the Focus ST, I believe. You can still get that 2.3 EcoBoost turbo. You can still get Hyundai hot hatches, you can get Toyotas, you can get Volkswagen Audi group cars. Vauxhall have never done it, unfortunately. And now it's absolutely bucketing with rain here. Climate change, it must be all of 14 degrees out there. Never changes in Scotland, I'll tell you that much. But General Motors, biggest car manufacturer on the planet at one point, American company, bought Vauxhall and Opel over, merged them into one company. They also owned Saab, Holden. At one point they had large interests in Suzuki, Isuzu and Daewoo they owned outright. They also owned Lotus at one point as well. So massive company, could not make a profit in Europe. Out with North America they seem to struggle massively with profits. They hadn't made a profit with Vauxhall and Opel since 1999. So losing money every year, and they couldn't work out a way to make money. Apparently they couldn't deal with building cars for different markets. America wants pickups and SUVs. Europe wants smaller compact vehicles. They couldn't make their economies of scale work. And they said it just wasn't viable for them. Well, Toyota could make it work, Volkswagen had been able to make it work, but there probably were other factors underlying with that as well. They had to come out of Chapter 11 bankruptcy in America in 2008, otherwise they would have gone bust along with Chrysler, and Ford were very close as well at that point. And as part of their Chapter 11 bankruptcy, the deal that they had to do with the United States government to be able to get the funds to be bailed out, they had to rationalise their brands, and that's why you saw them get rid of Saab, and then Pontiac and Saturn at the time, and then gradually they got rid of Holden as well, sold off Vauxhall and Opel. What happened was, post-credit crunch, we also had Brexit, which I don't think would ultimately been a major factor for them because everybody else managed to get over it. Did complicate things for a while there. Maybe wasn't ideal for car manufacturers, but I think that was just a bump in the road rather than being an immovable obstacle. You also had Dieselgate, where Volkswagen got caught playing about with the ECUs in their diesel cars to cheat the emissions, which cost all the manufacturers a lot of money. So that might have been a factor as well, along with the fact that GM just didn't have a functional global strategy. I think some of it came down to the American management didn't understand the other markets all that well. There's a lot of stories about what they thought would be appropriate for Europe, and you can see that. I'm sitting in a Cadillac BLS, and they spent a lot of money and effort to try and introduce Cadillac as the premium brand in Europe, and it never took off, which we'll get into in a bit. But it cost GM $6 billion to get Vauxhall and Opel transferred over to Stellantis, which features Alfa Romeo, Fiat, Peugeot, Citroën as part of their group as well, and Dodge in America, and Chrysler, of course. The interesting thing was, Stellantis very quickly turned Vauxhall and Opel into making a profit, which GM were never able to do. It seems that Stellantis' reorganisation and using different platforms, sharing them with Peugeot, that seemed to work for them, and all of a sudden they're making money. Stellantis was able to do something in Europe GM were never able to do. Now, Stellantis also bought over the Chrysler Group in America, and you're starting to see them have enormous problems. It's like GM, the American company, couldn't make Europe work, and it looks like Stellantis, the European company, cannot make America work. And there's all sorts of stories that Dodge might be sold to BYD, the Chinese EV manufacturer. Yeah, they ramped up the price of their cars enormously post-COVID, and they've also just finished production at the end of 2023 of the iconic Charger and Challenger muscle cars. Now, the platforms these cars were based on are very old, nearly 20 years old, and even that platform was based on the old E-Class Mercedes. So these cars, as iconic and popular as they are, were due for replacement. So they're going to be bringing out a new Dodge Charger to replace both those cars in 2- and 4-door form, because the old Charger was 4-door, the Challenger was a 2-door coupe. But they're also getting rid of the V8 engine. The Hemi V8 is no more, and people really aren't happy about that. But it wasn't just a matter of they just didn't want to make the V8 anymore. The problem that they had was, like the emissions regulations and mandates in the UK and in Europe, where the UK ones are much worse than the EU ones, by the way. In that instance, we would have been better off staying in the EU. But these the EV push in America is on the go as well, and the new Charger is coming out as an EV only for the first year before the petrol engine comes out. Now, they're replacing the V8 with a 3-litre straight-six turbo called the Hurricane. Yeah, so the Hemi replacement is a 3-litre straight-six called the Hurricane. It goes up to 550 horsepower. This engine is currently on the Jeep Grand Wagoneer, and it's not the same as a naturally aspirated V8. You did get the Hemi in 6.2 litre supercharged form, and also in 6.4 litre form in the Scat Packs, 5.7 in the RT and all the police cars. Really iconic, famous engine, but it was also an old-fashioned engine. So, still got a cam-in head, it was a gas guzzler, high on emissions, and what you've seen with General Motors and Ford is, they went and pushed quite heavily into EVs so they could continue to sell V8s, and what they also did was they redesigned their V8s. General Motors and Ford's V8s are much more modern. The Ford 5-litre Coyotes quad cam unlike having the old cam and head design. So that's enabled them to be able to continue to be able to sell V8s, although General Motors isn't the last year this year for the Camaro muscle car, the equivalent to the Challenger. It seems like Ford is the only show in town with their Mustang, which you can get with a 6-speed manual gearbox, or they've got this incredible 10-speed automatic transmission as well. And there's rumours coming out now that they're going to make a 4-door Mustang, which will be aimed, I would imagine, as a direct replacement for all those people that bought Chargers, including, crucially, the American police forces. The Dodge Charger was the definitive police car for all the state troopers for as long as it's been out. The 5.7 RT police pursuit package, 370 horsepower, and it looks like Ford might be looking to move in on that sector quite heavily, because even if Dodge do bring out the 3-litre straight six, the police aren't going to want to use it. A lot of guys, only a V8 will do. So Stellantis, her profits are through the floor in America, and they've got a range of cars coming out that people don't want to buy, and their petrol option isn't that popular either. They've also got they've tried to bring in other platforms into America. The Dodge Hornet, this little SUV they've brought in, is based directly on an Alfa Romeo, and people don't like it. There's loads of them sitting on lots everywhere. Not a popular car because it's European. People in America want, I don't know, they want American-based cars. Now here's the thing, I am a fan of Vauxhalls. I've spent my whole life around Vauxhall cars, and there's a lot of people like me in the UK. It might be a UK only brand, but the cars in many instances weren't directly identical to Opel's. They shared the same platform and a lot of the same trims, but you would find that the specifications could be quite different, which is in large part due to the fleet market in the UK and also UK buyers' tastes. They never got the Cavalier SRI or the Vectra SRI in Europe, and we sold many more sporting models than they did. But for a good 40 years, since basically 1980-81, when the Mark 1 Astra came in based on the Kadett D platform, the Mark II Cavalier came in, the Global J car platform, which was sold in America as the Chevrolet Cavalier. It looked different in Brazil as the Chevrolet Monza, car that went out right across the world. Since then, since they brought out the fuel-injected engine in 1983 with a 1.8, Vauxhall had a good 45-year run of building popular performance cars that everybody, accessible to everyone. That goes through the Astra GTEs, the Cavalier SRIs, and we went into the GSI era with the Cavalier and Calibra Turbo, the Lotus Carlton, which was the pinnacle of performance for Vauxhall for many people. We had the VX 220, and then we had the turbocharged front-wheel drive cars. We had the Astra VXR, the Vectra VXR, the VXR range as a whole, and they also brought over V8 rear-wheel drive muscle cars from Holden in Australia. We had the Holden Monaro and then the VXR8, as it was called, based on the Commodore. Phenomenal cars. The Holdens were so good that they transferred them over to America as well into Pontiac GTOs, and I think it was the Pontiac G8, which was the 4-door version, which was also a popular police car. So Vauxhall for many years had a great range of cars, performance cars that were very popular, and they might not have been prestigious, but people loved them, and there was a very strong enthusiast following for those cars. Now, the last ones in terms of the mainstream range were the Corsa VXR, which ended, I think, when the Corsa E finished, it was 2018. And then what I wanted to talk about was some of the last GM cars, performance ones, that we had before the move over to Stellantis, and also look at some of the different brands and some of the cars that we didn't get. Looking back, General Motors decided they wanted to try and introduce Cadillac to Europe as a prestigious brand. In the late 90s, they brought out the Seville in right-hand drive form, sort of around about 1999. You could get them. 32-valve Northstar V8 front-wheel drive. There's one of them on Auto Trader at the moment. Not a particularly interesting car or a viable purchasing decision for anybody who was probably alternatively looking at something like an Audi or a BMW or a Merc. Didn't sell very many of them, but there was a major push in the early 2000s to try and make Cadillac popular. The first one to come over was the CTS, a BMW 5 Series size car. Don't think we got the V8 versions of those. If we did, they're very rare. It was either a 3.6 or a 2.8 V6. Then you had the BLS, which is what this is, designed on the Saab 9.3 Epsilon platform, built in the Saab factory and designed to go head to head with the BMW 3 Series. Couple of grand cheaper, equivalent on a Saab. So you were paying a bit of a premium to get the Cadillac badge. Later on we also had the SRX, which is a bizarre sort of crossover estate, and we had the Escalade. There also was the STS in Europe, but I don't know if we even got them. I can't find any for sale online. That would be the equivalent to a BMW 7 Series. Now, the Cadillacs of this era weren't bad. We were slightly limited in what we got, as I said, with the CTS's offerings. We didn't get the highest output one. There was a CTS V, which was 400 horsepower. Could get it with a 6-speed manual gearbox. We never got it. Now, just as Cadillac was pulled out of the UK, the brand went under a complete transformation and they started building incredible performance cars. You look at the modern Cadillac range over the last 10 years and there are some amazing vehicles in there, and we missed out on them all in the UK. If only they decided to introduce them in 2012 sort of rather than about 2002. You had, I'll check my notes here, to my mind is the CT4, which is a 4-door saloon, starts 240, 310 horsepower in a 2-litre turbo version, and then we've got the CT4V, 325 horsepower, 2.7 turbo, and then you've got the Blackwing, which is a 3.6-litre V6 twin turbo with 474 horsepower. Now I'm going to come back to that engine in a little bit because it turns up in some other cars that we didn't get as well. Cadillac, they're also being built in China and they're very popular there. Moving on to GM has an operation in China with SAIC, who make the Maxus van and MG cars, which are becoming popular here. If you go and look under the bonnet of one of those modern MGs, you'll find a lot of GM stuff stamped in there, like the engines sometimes are General Motors derived. So a modern MG has got more Vauxhall related stuff in it than a Stellantis Vauxhall. Going up the size scale from the CT4, there's also the CT5 as well, which is a stretched version of the Sigma platform. Again, they've got these 2-litre 4-cylinders, 3-litre turbos, and then eventually you go up to the V8. Yeah, so Cadillac now, GM have got them thriving. Apparently coming back to the UK at the start of next year with right-hand drive cars, but they are full EVs, so I don't know how popular they're going to be with the price it's going to be on them. Now, moving on from Cadillac, we've got Chevrolet, which is General Motors' most popular brand in the States. It's a sort of standard car brand. Cadillac's a luxury brand. Used to have Pontiac, they've got Buick, they've got Oldsmobile. Well, they've got rid of Oldsmobile. But GM always had like a whole mix of brands. Now, Chevrolet in the UK had a massive identity crisis. General Motors decided to bring in Chevrolet to rebadge their Korean-derived Daewoo cars and position it as a sort of budget brand in the UK. But at the same time, they also were supplying the Corvette, which came in right-hand drive form in the Z06, the C6, C7 models, and also the Camaro, which they officially imported to the UK, albeit only in left-hand drive form. Now, Chevrolet came in about 2004, I think. They decided to replace Daewoo, and you had a few sort of budget cars. You had the Matiz, the Aveo, the Spark, and then you had the Cruze, which was the later ones were based on they were based on the Astra J platform, and a sort of a budget hatchback. The top output one was like a 1.8. There was no performance ones of it. And then later on, you had the Chevrolet Captiva, which was a direct relation to the Vauxhall and Tara, four-wheel drive SUV, and the Chevrolet Trax, which is a direct relative of the Mokka. Now all those cars are going to do is just eat into the potential Vauxhall sales of that brand. So I don't know what they were thinking about when they were trying to introduce Cadillac and Chevrolet at opposite ends of the scale, when they already had Vauxhall and Saab, which they should have just concentrated on. I really think Saab, they really should have invested more time and effort with that. Because if you look back into like the 80s and 90s, BMWs, Audis, Mercedes were rare cars. It was notable if somebody had one of them, because most people just bought Vauxhalls and Fords and Peugeots and whatever. But as time has gone on with the accessibility of leasing cars, more and more people have wanted VW, even VWs, Audis, all those kind of group of cars, and you see them everywhere now. What GM needed in Europe was a premium brand, and you see Volvo is still on the go today, so I don't see any reason why Saab couldn't have been. Saab should have had the SUV and the mini crossover, and they should have been able to build premium versions of those instead of being stuck selling almost the same car twice with the 9.3 and 9.5, as good as they were. Yeah, so Chevrolet was binned off in 2014 by GM as part of further restructuring, which they continued to do. They went and got rid of Holden, I think was it 2018-19, which was such a shame for Australia. The problem was in Australia that the people weren't buying the Commodore anymore, the big saloon, rear-wheel drive saloon car. Same with the Ford Falcon. People had moved towards crossovers and SUVs. It's the same everywhere. But it's such a shame that they had to kill off the Holden brand entirely. That's Australia's car. Such a shame there. But I do have a Holden to talk about, because did you know there's a VXR that we didn't get? I really like the Mark II Vauxhall Insignia. Came out 2017, it was gone by 2021. Short lifespan because Stellantis took over. I think it's a great looking car. And we never got a VXR version. What we got were 3 performance versions, sort of the GSI. I think one was called the Grand Sport. So I'll go through these first before I get to the VXR version, which we never got. It's not called an Insignia. Now, the previous generation Insignia had a VXR, which led on from the Vectra VXR. The Insignia VXR was 4-wheel drive, 2.8 V6 turbo, 325 horsepower, cracking car. One of the problems it had, top tax bracket, £600 odd to go and tax it a year, which they still sold quite a few. You'll see a few of them on for sale on eBay and Auto Trader and things. The new version comes out, no VXR version. What we did get was a GSI version. Now the original one, now I believe there's a Grand Sport version, I'll put it on the screen, and then which was 260 horsepower, 4-wheel drive, 2-litre petrol, and we also had the GSI bi-turbo diesel, 207 horsepower, I think something like 360 foot of torque, quite a lot. Now they were also 4-wheel drive versions, and sold in very small numbers because things were really moving on by that time, and unfortunately people didn't want to, the cost of these cars was getting really high and people didn't want to invest in mainstream large family cars. The Mondeo got binned off as well around the same time as the Insignia. Still an interesting car though, if you could pick one of them up. I'm definitely going to be looking out for them. Now, there was a revised version of the Insignia GSI which had only 230 horsepower, but it had a whole raft of changes to it. 2021 was the very last of them, and they've got a lot. They have got a lot of interesting design to them. They've got enormous Brembo brakes on them. They've got a really clever 4-wheel drive system, 9-speed automatic gearbox. There's probably about 5 of them in the UK. It wouldn't surprise me. Now, there was a VXR version of this, but it wasn't called the Insignia, and it was sold only in Australia as the Holden Commodore VXR. Now, the Holden Commodore previous to this was the Vauxhall VXR8, 6.2 litre V8, thumping great big muscle car, and they decided to try and replace it with this, the Insignia version, which is a standalone car, I mean, it's a very good car, but it's not a V8 muscle car by any stretch of the imagination. But I find it so interesting that they did not sell these cars in Europe, that it was only Holden that got them. Now, 3.6 VVT turbo, 315 horsepower, is a single turbo version of the 3.6 that's in the Cadillac CT4, CT5 Blackwing, which goes up to 474 horsepower. So there's plenty of potential for one of those engines in the Holden Commodore VXR. Now, I had a little look online and I found a few of them for sale. There's one of them up on the screen now. That equates to 15 grand in British pounds, which sounds like a pretty good deal to me for the car. I think that's so interesting that right at the end of the GM days, they built a VXR for the Australian market using the Insignia chassis and called it a Commodore. Yeah, GM at their best, but it's a performance model. Now, interestingly, the Insignia platform, the car, was also sold in America as the Buick Regal, and they got various versions or performance versions of that as well in the GS model. Now, the only place in the world the Insignia platform car is still on sale is as a Buick Regal, and that's in China, where Buicks are seen as a prestigious performance model. If it wasn't for the Chinese market, GM probably would have killed them off, but they're still making them. The Insignia, the Regal, has just had a facelift now, and you can get it with a variety of engines, and that goes right back to the original Insignia models. They had their own version of the four-wheel drive Insignia A VXR, which is pretty interesting. So China's a massive market for Buick. They sell about 1 million of them a year. And it's interesting to see how the car has developed and how it might have looked today had Stellantis not taken over Vauxhall and GM were still in charge. It frustrates me that Stellantis don't do any performance models for Vauxhall. Yeah, it frustrates me that Stellantis have never done any performance models for Vauxhall. Now, they've done them for Peugeot, but as a company as a whole, they don't really seem to be into this sort of thing. They've got the Alfa Romeo, the big saloon car with the Ferrari engine, 520 horsepower. And the annoying thing is they do have a 2-litre 4-cylinder turbo. It's a 4-cylinder equivalent to the 6-cylinder Hurricane engine that's going into the new Dodge Charger. 280 horsepower, it would be perfect to go and fit in the Astra. Too late to do it now, but they could have done it back when the Astra K, probably not using GM model names anymore, Astra K came out. They could have done something with the Corsa, but all you get is a petrol option in the Stellantis cars now is a miserable 1.2 3-cylinder turbo. I hate 3-cylinder engines. I don't know why they insist on persisting with them, because they make such a horrible noise and they're not balanced. And yeah, and until recently those Stellantis engines had a wet timing belt in them, so they're not going to last very well. Now, if you want anything approaching a performance model in the Astra, you've got to go for the GSE, which you've probably never heard of because it's very expensive. 225 horsepower, 1.6 turbo hybrid, weighs 1.8 tons, 0 to 60 in about 7.5 seconds, so, you know, all 2-litre Cavalier will probably keep up with it. That's your only performance option across the entire Vauxhall range. There are more options and more potent options available at Peugeot, but these will be ending at the end of the year as well. They've got the 508, the big saloon car, which is equivalent to the Insignia. Now, you could get a top spec version of that called the PSE. The standard Peugeot performance model is a 1.6 turbo, I think it's like 225, same as the Astra. The 508 PSE has 2 electric motors, 1 for each axle, 355 horsepower, 384 foot of torque. But due to the ZEV mandate that's coming in, they're going to be getting rid of that car. They're reducing their hybrid offering. So all you're going to be able to get from Stellantis, just soon in Europe, is an EV, which is going to create problems for them and any other manufacturer that goes down this route, because it's not going to be viable. We're going to be coming to a crunch with this. Oh, and since 2019, they only sold 7,000 Peugeot 508s in the UK in 5 years. I'm sure Vauxhall sold a lot more Insignias than that. So, yeah, I mean, as a whole, it's very frustrating that we're seeing the end of all petrol diesel performance cars, and it's frustrating that General Motors sold Vauxhall because we have missed out on some potential performance options there with that 3.6-litre turbo engine. Even if it wasn't brought here in a Vauxhall, it could have been brought over in a Cadillac. But General Motors, being a fan of their cars, it's like being in an abusive relationship. You know, they got rid of Vauxhall Opel, they killed Saab, Holden, Pontiac, even Saturn, Oldsmobile. They've killed off so much, and they had to go and sell them to Stellantis, who are busy killing Dodge in America. So yeah, I just wanted to natter on about cars for a good while there. I've done this kind of off the top of my head, so if any bits and pieces are incorrect in it, I apologise in advance. Don't take it to heart. I'll be back with a normal video soon. I've got quite a few things up in there at the moment with cars waiting for parts and stuff, so I'll catch up with you again soon. If you'd like to see me do more of a deep dive into any of these General Motors brands and what they've been up to in recent years, you know, Chevrolet, Cadillac, Saab, Vauxhall, whatever, let me know. Take care, bye bye. Bob, what are you up to? Really? Trying to attack the tools through the windscreen.